My 60 Years on the Plains, Chapter 20. There were several. On the road to Fort Bridger, I passed 2 trains bound for Oregon, which contained many women and children and one Mormon outfit. There were several Mormons at the fort, and a visible change had taken place. We were all aware that in a very few years a great immigration would take place, but we had not looked for the Mormons migrating to Salt Lake. In every direction, rumors were afloat of large gold discoveries in California, and all the trappers were discussing the possibility of making fortunes. 2 days before I reached Bridger, a war party of Indians had run off 30 horses belonging to the men at the fort, who followed them for a day without success. They were a poor lot of men who eked out an existence by just hanging around the trading posts. We trappers called them Dobie men. I continued on to Brown's Hole Rendezvous and found there my 4 partners as well as 15 of our old companions. The next day, a couple of wagons arrived from Weston, Missouri, laden with goods for trading purposes. They brought news of a great excitement throughout the East over the California gold fields, and that a great many people were taking ship, some going around Cape Horn and others by the Panama route. The news created much excitement at the rendezvous, as the majority had not heard of it before. A council was held by the trappers on the advisability of starting at once for California, taking the southern trail. Our party decided to wait until spring and take the Humboldt Trail, which is now Interstate 80, striking middle California. We believed that if any gold were there, it would probably be in that section of the country. Among the arrivals were 3 gentlemen, 2 from St. Louis and 1 from Kentucky, who were anxious to have a hunt in the Bighorn Mountains. They had heard and read a great deal about that romantic spot and of the wild and free life of the American trapper and mountaineer, and they were desirous of investigating in person with a view of publishing an account of their trip. We warned them that it was a dangerous country at all seasons of the year, but that 10 trappers would see them through. They were eager to go and offered to engage 10 trappers for 2 months, furnish the outfit, and pay each trapper $100 a month. Besides this, the trappers could take their traps and retain all furs caught, as they were anxious to see in what manner beaver and otter were caught. While these gentlemen were making their offer, Perkins arrived from Las Vegas, bringing a letter to me from Williams, who wanted me to come there and go into partnership with him in trading. I should certainly have gone had I not decided on the California trip. I never saw Williams again. A few years afterwards, the Southern Utes killed him by mistake in Apache Pass. They were great friends of Old Bill, and they packed him to their village and gave him a chief's burial, mourning for him as one of their own. The Utes themselves told me this. Perkins and I accepted the offer of these Eastern men and made up a party of 10 trappers. There were several Indians at the rendezvous who had ponies for trade, and our outfit was soon furnished. The trip was a most enjoyable one for all concerned. Game of every description was abundant, and the Easterners became good hunters. They were highly pleased at their success and paid each man double what they had agreed to. The Shoshones discovered our camp on 9 Blackfoot Sleep Creek, so called because 9 Blackfoot Indians were caught asleep by the Shoshones, who forced them to continue their sleep indefinitely. The day the Shoshones found us, Silvertip was on duty as picket. He could almost scent an Indian a mile off, and his keen eyes were as keen and penetrating as an eagle's. He was never known to give a false alarm. We were bear hunting at the time, and we saw his signal and hurried to camp. He said that Indians were not far off, as a few buffalo had been raised and antelope were scampering in every direction. These signs were significant to mountain men, though, of course, the game might have been raised by friendly Indians. The stock was all corralled and everything prepared for the reception of a war party. At sunset, 15 Indians were seen advancing, one riding in advance at full speed, firing a rifle, which meant friends. He came boldly into camp, and we soon recognized him as Humpy, a most remarkable Indian of about 25 years of age. His height was only 5 feet 2, and he had a large lump on his shoulders. He was a leader of war parties, fearless and cautious, with many coups to his credit. These Indians had been after a war party of Cheyennes who'd stolen some Shoshone ponies. Overtaking them on the North Platte River, they recovered the ponies. They'd heard the shots from our party and could not understand who could be in that country with such guns. The report being much louder than theirs, they scouted and discovered boot tracks, which mystified them even more. Finally, they discovered a trapper's moccasin track, and they no longer hesitated approaching camp. We invited them to supper and conversed until past midnight, interpreting every word to the 3 Eastern men. They took a keen interest in the conversation and said they had not experienced such intelligence from wild Indians. We told these gentlemen that the Shoshones ranked for acumen with the most advanced in America. Humpy told us that Washaki's village was on a creek called Gray Bull, but was soon moved to the south fork of Stinking Water, and he advised us to go there on account of the many war parties in the country. This we concluded to do, and it was while en route that we gave the gentleman a practical illustration of Indian warfare. We were camped on Shell Creek, and Dockett, who had been out scouting, reported having seen smoke, presumably from an Indian camp. The next day, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Silvertip signaled Indians. The stock was immediately corralled, and Silvertip reported having seen a small band of Indians, some on horseback, traveling directly towards our camp, though he was certain they had not discovered us as yet. The men put on all arms, which in fact were seldom off, and the Easterners began to get a little uneasy, asking if these were hostile Indians. We answered that it was a sure thing that such a party were after scalps or horses, not being particular which. We hid in a thicket to observe their movements, and did not have long to wait before they came in sight on a rise. About 300 yards away. They could not see camp from that side, but they had discovered our horse tracks. They approached very carefully and looked over, but could discover nothing. We counted 9 on horseback and 10 on foot. The Indians now consulted for some time, and then the horsemen made a detour, looking closely for tracks. After crossing the creek, they saw our lodge and at once returned to the footman on the rise. Another consultation was held, its object most likely to estimate how many men would be there with only one lodge. Must be a trapper's lodge. At all events, after some time passed, the footmen divided, 5 going above the camp, 5 below. The nature of this movement was well understood by the trappers, for the Indians intended to crawl through the timber and underbrush to the lodge and find out who was there. Should they find no one, they would conceal themselves until the return of the occupants and take them by surprise. Then kill, scalp, and plunder. These are Indian tactics, but this time these red men were circumvented. 3 men were sent up the creek to conceal themselves about 75 yards from camp, and 3 below. They had not long to wait. The Indians approached in a careless manner, without suspicion. Above camp, the trappers let the Indians get within 10 feet, and they jumped out, pistols in hand. Before the Indians realized what was happening, they were dead. A moment afterwards, a scattering fire was heard below camp, and 2 Indians were seen running towards their mounted companions on the ridge. The trappers rushed to the corral and mounted, bidding the Eastern men do likewise and see an Indian fight, as it might be their only chance. The Indians on the ridge were somewhat mystified and remained there until we were out of the timber. At the sight of us, they beat a hasty retreat, but it was too late. In order to escape, they should have started as soon as they heard the shots. Their horses were indifferent ones, while ours were the very pick of the plains, and could not be excelled in any country for either endurance or speed. The 2 footmen mounted behind the horsemen. When we reached the ridge, the Indians were about 400 yards away and going for all that was out, as Silvertip said. They were making for the Bighorn River about 3/4 of a mile distant. Before they had covered half that distance, we were amongst them, passing in single file. By the time the last trapper passed, they were all on their way to the happy hunting grounds. As the last Indian fell, the 3 Easterners rode up, greatly surprised at the sudden termination of the fight. They had expected to see the Indians make some resistance, and then they would have taken a hand. "But you trappers do not give a person time to do a thing except follow," they said. They had heard just such fights described, but could not believe it possible. We collected all the plunder the Indians had, besides scalping them, to the amusement of the gentlemen. We asked them to lift some of the hair, but could not prevail on them to do so. Although after we had the scalps stretched on hoops and dried, they took half a dozen to show to their friends in the East. That night, they asked why the Indians had not used bows and arrows which they carried in their hands. We answered that the Indian had made their minds set on getting to the timber, and they did not know the quality of the men who were after them. We rode passing them on their right, because they could not use their bows and arrows on that side without turning around. They did not know which side we would come up on, for we did not fire a shot until within 10 feet. Then, passing in single file, we delivered shots as we passed. They had no time to turn, as we passed like a whirlwind. When the last man passed, the Indians were most of them dead. Had we passed them on the left side, some of us might have been hurt, though that is very doubtful, as men and horses alike were quick and active. And another thing, the closer you are to an Indian, the less danger there is of getting hurt. You confuse him, and he does not seem able to collect his thoughts. These Indians were strange to us, but when shown the scalps, Washakie told us that they were pinned Oreas. We spent a very pleasant time at the Shoshone village, especially the first evening when we recounted to Washakie how we had trapped the Indians. He was highly pleased and said old trappers are wolves, meaning an Indian way of speech, hard to take in or always on the alert. He thought the Pindareas were fools to think that there were no trappers at the lodge. We gave the rest of the scalps to the Shoshones, and the young folks had a merry scalp dance which kept up until past midnight. We went on buffalo hunts, on bear hunts, and in fact gave our employers an opportunity to try their hand on every variety of game to be found in that section, much to their satisfaction. When we reached Green River and bade our 3 gentlemen adieu, we were all well satisfied with the trip. End of chapter 20.